So today's topic, tonight's topic is just, what are IT products? So we'll kind of go over common day IoT products that exist in our household, consumer, enterprise, what's a good market fit for an IoT product, what's a bad one, and we'll kind of go over the story as a PM, what your job is to kind of identifying. And then also I'll kind of go over the stories of bad ones and a decision framework made from one of the people that I love that's an IoT, kind of like PM leading PM to the IoT. His name is Daniel. So we'll kind of go over that framework and how it can be used to make decisions as a product manager to build an IoT product. So you guys already know my name is William. I am a PM with a multidisciplinary background in product management, user experience design. I actually didn't get started in product management. That wasn't my start. I started out as a UX designer. And what I learned more and more throughout my career is that I started loving product management more, meaning from the aspect where taking blue sky thinking and ideation and working with stakeholders, business stakeholders, C-levels, and just aggregating all that information and creating a roadmap and being able to lead a team. So I found more value and more fulfillment from just from the strategy perspective. And my background in terms of things I've touched, mobile applications, web applications. I've done applications for SaaS, so it's cloud architecture. I've even done experience with hardware, which is I've done a drone app. So that's kind of fun. So, but overall, my fascination of just internet things is just an enthusiast. I just love how this market has exploded in the last couple of years. I mean, the market cap for 2015, I think it was like 909 million, and now it's projected by like the year 2020, it's going to be over a couple $2 billion. So you can see where it's growing. And kind of a good indicator for this is just CES. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with CES. Yeah. So if you guys saw the news, like what exploding at it, there's Google, Lenovo, like the big players out there starting to come with a slew of internet-connected devices. And so that's just an indicator that that this is a hot topic. It's like the next wave. So how the cloud was that big one like beforehand. The storm and things. Like people are going to do that. Same thing that's happening for the internet for devices that are being connected. So I mean, we all have internet-connected devices in our pocket. We have a Siri, we have an Apple Watch, an Alexa home. It's like it might be small now, but give or take, 3 to 5 years, it's going to be pretty huge. It's going to be embedded in your everyday life. So cool. So what is IoT? So IoT I would say, it's harder to find. It's a pretty broader term. But to simplify it, it's just, everyday things, such as a toaster, like everyday devices that you use that are connected to the internet and produce data. And hopefully this data that's connected, that's getting produced, is provided to be meaningful data, meaning that it's going to be actionable to the user, which is the consumer, and also to the business. So that's one of those key indicators of when you're making an IoT device. We have to make sure that it's a value to its end users. But it's an area that's growing. It's still being defined. Like right now, I believe it's in infancy. I mean, there have been devices early on, like the first Apple smartwatch, people would wear it. It's still growing. So it's broad that how it's being defined, it's how it's being run, and either the consumer or enterprise. So I don't want to give it a clear definition. So where we can find IoT. So you can think of two segments where you can find IoT devices, was either the consumer or the enterprise. So for consumer market, you can think of the new Apple HomePod that just came out. That's like a home speaker. So it connects to your phone. It connects to the Apple HomeKit, meaning you can control your home. So it connects to all the integration, and that in itself is an intelligent device. It's not just labeled as an Internet of Things device. It's called an intelligent device in itself because it integrates into an ecosystem that's built around the Internet of Things. Another device is like your phones. Believe it or not, like when Siri first came out, your phones became the Internet of Things. It's like being able to access them, being able to tell Siri, tell my wife I'm going to be late or something like that, pretty easily without touching it. But the enterprise is where it's going to be a game changer. It started out where we have servers. You can remote log into a server, be able to manage those. But what's going to be huge is that you're going to be able to manage access. Right now it's power grids, but you should be able to manage like huge acres of power grids from across the ocean from your back pocket. But the reliability is going to grow bigger and bigger. And where I see it growing further in the enterprise market is agriculture. It's going to be huge. The reason why is that it's going to reduce the labor. I wouldn't say like reduce labor forces, but it's going to ease the labor costs associated with that. And then mainly, what's important about like the enterprise is that it's going to introduce preventive maintenance. So the reason why is that you being able to monitor your tractors are doing, like your John Deere's or your wheat mill. You being able to see that behaviors recording what was the produce output of that device over the last 6 months, and you can see that it's inconsistency. You know, it's like it's easier to do some sort of preventive maintenance early on instead of having someone rush out and do emergency services, increasing costs. So it's gonna be huge in the market. And this goes for healthcare too. So if you have something monitoring your health, like your insulin pumps, for instance, like Apple iWatch introduced heart rate active monitoring. So it gives you a warning, like if it senses a huge spike, it tells you you're gonna have a heart attack soon. Well, there's irregular activity. So, you know, as product managers, our job is to kind of identify early on the business case for any product in itself. We have to make sure that the need that we're addressing, you know, it comes into good product. I don't use that generic kind of sense. It's that we have to make sure we have a good product market fit, meaning whatever we decide to build on fits that need, and it's the proper solution. So a couple devices that I kind of want to go through that they're kind of good examples that I like, that have good common themes of good product fit, is the Nest, the Google Home speaker, the Wi-Fi smart plug, and the Ring doorbell. The reason why I like the Wi-Fi smart plug, if you think about the first iteration before this, is what was it, a timer, right? So you only had two options, was either to off or on, and setting the time. And the thing is like, let's say you have a house in let's say Palm Springs, right? And there's a daylight savings time, like that you're gonna have like the clock, the light going out like at 4 o'clock p.m., right? So it's like, but what's great about this Wi-Fi plug is that thanks to the Internet of Things, you can change the time and scheduling and set a consistent manner and monitor the usage out of that outlet as well too. So it's benefit to the user, meaning that it's going to reduce the cost. You can change the schedule with minimal effort. And for the Google Home, this is a great product. The reason why I like it is, you know, it addresses multiple needs. I mean, the design itself, it's meant, you know, it's meant for a wide audience. You know, you can get in a wide array of colors. It has a nice public cloth. It's cheap. I would cheap in the sense that it's affordable. It's not very expensive though. The entry to have is great, and it gives you access to something that we all have, which is Google at the fingertips. So when you're cooking, you can do quick conversions, or you need to add something to your cooking list, or you want to put music and so forth. But this is an intelligent device that is integrated into the ecosystem. One that I find kind of cool, that was kind of a surprise, was the Ring doorbell. How many of you guys have a Ring doorbell or use it at all? Used it? I mean, what's kind of great about it is it takes a pretty arcade concept of just the doorbell and modernizes it. So typically, this prevents package theft, lets you know who is at home. It lets you know there's motion in the front door or there's a delivery. And most importantly, it gives you a notice of someone who's even knocking at your door, dropping packages, or even monitoring your house, trying to break in. So having this recording is accessible from any cloud. It's great. The entry point for this is pretty clear. And lastly, the one that's iterated over time and probably the most popular and most familiar with is the Nest intelligent thermostat. So they market this as a learning thermostat. And this is a good product that overall it's been through, and this product came out of Google Ventures. And so I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jake Knapp's Sprint book. So he's the one who who created the design sprint. And so he was part of the Google Ventures. So that's actually one of the products that they worked with Nest. Originally, it wasn't part of Google, but it was from Nest. So they decided to figuring out early on the product need and the product fit and what would be beneficial to the user to use the product. So Div itself is just kind of like, I find this is a good case of good product fit. Any questions so far? Okay. So poor product fit. There are lots of those out there. I mean, there's devices that came out of CES. It's just like boxers that tell you when you need to go to the bathroom, which I find very weird because, I mean, your bodily functions tell you already when you have to go. Diapers, I'd understand that. Even vaguely. But two good examples that I just like that just were just following the fad and not connecting was the Griffin toaster. So Griffin, yeah, that brand is associated with the iPod, connecting iPod adapter, so forth. So they came out with a toaster. So this toaster is connected to the internet, and you get even an iPhone application. So this iPhone application is pretty complex. So it tells you what toast, like what level of toast you want, what level of doneness you want your toast. So and it tells you timers. So you're brushing your teeth, figuring out your sourdough. But what's kind of funny, it doesn't tell you if it's burned or not. It just counts down. But this is kind of one of those cases that there was no research done. This in itself, if you look at the toaster, it's fine as it is. I mean, it's great to slap the internet on it, but that doesn't mean it's fit a need. Because the toaster itself, I think, is well designed. I mean, you have like easy mechanical levels to set. And when it's done, you get a pavilion response of ding, so you know that the toast is done. I mean, and it's not worth it, and it's expensive. So this toaster I think was like a couple $100. And you can pick one up like at the 99-cent store if needed. But the big culprit of one is Juicero. How many are familiar with Juicero? Yeah, cool. So what do you know about Juicero?
Just that people were laughing because you basically can just squeeze the packages out of it, so they couldn't see. I mean, the cost per liter was ridiculous.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things too. Is that I'll go into the reasons like why Juicero failed. It failed for multiple reasons. I don't want to knock it. I mean, there were pretty novel things they wanted to do. They wanted to source. They did work with people who like natural growers, so the community, to source the ingredients for their packets. But there were good intentions, but they missed the basic notions of each sections of the development team, from the hardware, the software, all the way to the PMs, acted independently, and there was no communication. And when you say sky's the limit, the development team, the hardware team, they're going to make everything custom. So if you look at the device in itself, it's a pretty sexy machine. It's like an Apple's machine. All the parts are custom made, and what's pretty crazy. And I'll send a link of just like a breakdown of this entire machine. But just the complexity of it, it's like each, I'd say the machine itself was like there were handmade parts to it. But big part of it though, to not deviate, is just unchecked hardware development. So a big part is, the second part of it is just like a very niche market goal. So there was articles based on the investor and just the CEO, is that it was kind of niche for that, but like that bodega. The bodega would sell you like an $18 smoothie and so forth, and try to make the returns on it. So it's a very niche market, and it's marketed towards the very rich. But to overall, I think the one thing that they forgot to do, and it's very apparent, is like they did all this work without some sort of validation, basic proof that this business model, this approach, was the proper one to make. And what's a good example is that the way they designed the machine, there was an easier way to engineer that same concept of squeezing it. You could have made the device a lot cheaper. But a big part of this is just.
How many was behind the Juicero? Like, was it an individual or a large company?
It was like the brainchild of the CEO, and he hired he got like a couple $100 worth of investment, and he just said, told the engineering team, I want this to be done. So it was very driven from the top down.
The CEO, sorry, what company?
Juicero, I don't know what it's like back.
It was a startup. I mean, they got some initial funding.
Yeah, they got some initial funding, yeah.
Also, just original stuff.
It's an original startup, yeah. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
But it was like, that thing was also $500. I mean, so it's like, what problem was it really solving? Going to Jamba Juice, that was the problem it was solving?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good product, and it's again, one of those things is that there's different approaches to go about that. But how we can reduce the problem. One of the tenets as a PM, your job is to do research, do your due diligence, figuring out user experience. And I don't mean it in terms of designing, but doing your due diligence of the research, doing what exists out there, what is the price point of a juicer out there, figuring out what are low technical, even if it's low technical in terms of it's connected to the internet, and it's just you just need an off switch remotely, or just being able to tell you it's the Keurig. That'd be simple enough. But the purpose is that doing research early on is that you'll be able to put on constraints early on in the process. So you'll be able to tell the hardware team, the software development team, saying, this is the user experience that we want to capture. This is what we need to do. This is the action that we need to convey. So these are your restrictions. So not only that, they'd be able to prototype earlier on. And if they prototype earlier on, it would reduce the cost significantly and provide oversight. So there's a check on there too with the businesses. So you're saying, hey, this is the product need, this is the fit, this is how much it's going to cost us. And so if the CEO actually heard in the beginning how much it's going to cost you, he would have said no. But what's leading into this is that is a decision framework for IoT products. Is made by a PM who was originally a software engineer. His name is Daniel Liz, and he created this IoT framework, and it's really great. This is going to provide the tenets of like, regardless of the market that is, either for consumer or enterprise, an IoT product falls into these five tenets of this technology stack, meaning that there's a hardware aspect, the device software aspect, the communications, cloud platform, and cloud applications. And what I mean by device hardware, it's the thing that connects to the internet. I mean, this can be, and again, it doesn't have to be an entire new product. It can be an existing product, something that you can attach sensors or some sort of humidifier to. So something that helps either benefit the system or you can create a new one. And for the device software, this is where it helps translate and turns the device into an IoT device. So depending on the definition, we can divide this as a piece of information that assists the hardware, what constraints it puts on, what we need to collect, what we need to define, what we need to pass on to the communication portion. And the communication is very important because this sends constraints of what is being collected, what is being recorded, what needs to be sent to the cloud, what happens on when it's inactive, when it's active, what happens if there's a malicious attempt from a network system. So there's protocols during that, and then moves on to the cloud platform. And this is very important. So following the tenets of a good user experience from the left to the right is you figure out like, okay, what I need to collect from hardware, collect from software, communications, and at that point, this is where the business gets involved fully, is that you take all the data, seeing how, one, we can define the KPIs to iterate on the product, what we can learn from it, what we can charge for it, and essentially what business model do we need to provide, we can charge for. And then lastly is the cloud applications. This is the one that all of us are familiar. So if we all, let's say, I think someone used to get an Alexa, right? So the hardware is not only just a solely interface. Typically with each IoT product, it has a companion app where you can select and define the settings. There's an interface. You can say privacy settings when you connect Spotify to Alexa. So those are the ones familiar with it. This is where, in itself, very useful to the user. But along with this stack, we provided a decision framework. So the decision framework is really important. And as you can see, there are different sections where there's UX, data, business, technology, security, and standards and regulation. And how this decision framework works is that you work from left to right. So meaning that you define that, from the UX perspective, you find out what are the user needs and what are the user wants and start defining it. And then you move on to the device software. What is the UX need for the data point? Like we defined it that we want to, for the Nest thermostat, for instance, we want to be able to collect the temperature, the average temperature they want to set. Okay, how does this translate to the device software? And then from here, how do we communicate that? How does that, is there an online interface? How does this translate to the application itself? And the other one is the cloud platform. How's all this information going to translate to the cloud? Is it going to be able to break it under users? Can we scale it 10,000 users? What happens if we need 500? Do we need to think of a different way? And lastly, it's a cloud application, which is the Nest thermostat. So it's the interface, or just like how people interface. Typically, it's not just, sometimes there's screens on there, but that doesn't mean it's the only interface. There's a companion app that makes it a lot easier. You can go deep into settings. And this goes for, same thing for the data. I mean, this is here, you just go through the data, how data flows from device hardware and software communications, and so forth for the business plan. So based on your users' needs and your data needs, you can now start making business decisions that that will kind of feed into your business plan and knowing how you would charge for the device. What worked on V1, and then you start implementing in V2. And then second to last is, third to last is technology. So you take all the tenets, what you've learned from UX, dev, and business, and you let technology decide what technology framework to use. Like what's going to be, this is the price point that we need to meet for the product. So the technology team will define, okay, based on these constraints, this is going to be the most affordable, that's going to scale well. And lastly, the ones that you see typically that products tend to skip is security. I don't know if you've seen like so many internet products get hacked, like nanny cams and so forth. Is that they're like, oh, you know what? Let's just make it a basic port and let people go to the back door. And like, I mean, if you Google out there, you can most likely log into a remote camera. So this is one of the things that I liked about his framework is that he creates a decision framework that all these steps are accounted for. Cool. Any questions so far?
Sorry, what was the last one?
Oh yeah, standards and regulations. So it's just standardized. It's just figuring out like what are the tenets, what are the standardizations that we need to follow for that industry, like what are the UX standards for consumers, for business, are we following, are there any ethical things that we need to look out for? For instance, if we put a new Echo Dot in the bedroom, should we put a camera on there? Do people like it? And as you can see that the first iteration doesn't work, and what actually made a better product was LAUX. So they have a physical switch. It was, I don't know, one of his questions, it says like, it's still people are listening to. What's great is that it's a kill switch, but it, how people put table or the camera. The second iteration, it just blocks the camera in itself. So it's a cool device, but I don't want a camera like pointing at me when I'm sleeping. But over this framework is not. There's a big notion that people think that IoT is just solely a product. It's an ecosystem, and the important thing about this ecosystem is just not one product manager that's involved in this. There's a product manager typically at each of these different stacks. So there's a product manager of the device, software, communications, platform, and the cloud applications. And this framework decision is supposed to help encourage communication. So whatever's happening in the device hardware, making sure that the end result's happening in the cloud application. So it's just increased communication. Well, what's great is that this tells you what you should know at a minimum. So I would suggest if you're interested in diving into the technology stack, pick a specific part of the stack, learn it really well, but learn the different tenets and basics of each of them, because when you start talking to different parts of the team, you want to get a basic understanding. So become a T-shaped person, as PMs are. So how to get started? So, talking and doing are two different things. So what I suggest is, there are starter kits out there. Starter kits allow you kind of like learn the basics of how the IoT ecosystem works. One of my favorite ones that I own, that I started out with, is the IoT Starter Kit by Adafruit. It's very affordable. It's only like $30 some dollars. But it's great is that it provides you kind of like household devices, same things like there's a speaker, there's a humidifier, kind of like a door, kind of like the good products that I mentioned that have like good product fit. You can prototype those. And what's great is that it's flexible, affordable, and reusable. So when you're done prototyping a project or just ideating on something, you can take it apart, record it, move it on. But this is very important to know because they have an additional product where they have an API or kind of like the cloud application dashboard that I mentioned here that focuses on these two things. So when you prototype, after you physically prototype and think of the hardware you can connect it, you can see what you've physically done and how it's enabled and what to collect and to find out what periods so you can decide the time. I do have to admit the learning curve is a little steep, but if that's not your that's not your way, there's another alternative to it. You still have to buy the hardware components for these, but there's a platform called Blink that's available on iOS and Android. And it's great is that these provide like drag and drop widgets. Drag and drop widgets meaning that all you need to do is just put the basic components on a breadboard, and define what they are, and put some jumpers to connect one and two. But you can typically get be able to have a device that's connected to a wireless controller, turns on the light, and you can control it from your desktop or your phone within like 10 to 15 minutes. It's pretty free. But yeah, the closing notes that I have, just make sure that the IoT product has been vetted, has a product market fit, but most importantly, provides a solution to a need. I think that's the main thing. I can't iterate that just because you put data on it doesn't mean it's useful. Making sure it follows the need. But to go back to this framework, I wouldn't say this is the holy grail. You still, the core product management principles, such as validation, research, are still applied here. You're still using traditional methods. The difference is that this framework is here to guide you at each step of the way. So if you're interested, I would recommend his website, Tech Product Management. He's a really great guy, has really good material, writes often, and has a course that he has in Stanford. I'm sure there's online lecture notes, so this is a good place to start. And then second of all, again, IoT is just not a product. It's a complex ecosystem, as you saw. You have to think about the different levels and layers. Think of it as kind of like a sheet cake. It's just like there's different stacks to it, different complexity. And that shows that it requires communication across different teams. And then lastly, I mean, if you're really interested on the ecosystem, just pick a section and learn it. That's the best way to go about it. I mean, now it's a good point and it's in infancy. I think it's in infancy to pick a section, get started, learn about it, and try to become an expert. And if you want to get hands-on, I would recommend looking at a product or a leader in that space, or just like even a CTO who on some part of the team, because it's not just one CTO, it's multiple engineering, it's multiple product managers. Look out there, send them a message and figure out like how does this product work, or even that. Look at a product that you find usable or you find friendly, and try to break it down yourself and see how that product fits in each of that decision framework. Cool. Thank you guys. Do you guys have any questions?